Good evening and welcome to the very first episode of Cooperative Vermont. We're coming to you live from VCAM Studios this Sunday, November 18th, 2012. I'm Matthew Kropp.
I'm Eric Davis.
And with this new show, we're going to be really digging into the cooperative movement in Vermont. There's lots of different kinds of co-ops and lots of different, that impact many different pieces of people's lives. And so we're going to be trying to sort of bring both kind of every other week some news from the Vermont cooperative movement, and as well as an interview with a Vermont cooperator or a few cooperators potentially per show. So do you have any kind of thoughts on what we're doing as we dive into this project?
Well, I guess I would plug the Facebook page. As Cooperative Vermont group on Facebook, and I think sort of the momentum for this show grew out of that page. So.
Yeah, so in between the shows, we're going to try to keep that Facebook page updated with any news, any things of interest that pop onto our radar screen, and we'll try to post a recorded version of this show on that page as well. So if you're coming in the middle, or you can't watch the whole thing this evening, and you want to see it, or you want to share the show with your friends, head over to the Facebook page, and you should be able to share it around. And also, we've got a few. We'll hopefully have people scheduled out a few weeks out. We're going to be doing these shows every other Sunday at 7. So we've got I think Avram Pat. I don't actually know how to pronounce his name, but who's the general manager of the Washington County, the electric co-op in Washington County. And we've got a couple other guests who are kind of maybes right now, but we'll hopefully have something good for the next episode.
So Avram's on 2 weeks from today?
Not 4 weeks. So
okay.
Not next episode, but the episode after. So, kind of digging into some of the recent news from the cooperative world of Vermont. The first piece is in Brattleboro. Kind of a couple of interesting things coming out of there. They just opened their new store, and the workers just approved a union for the store. So big changes down in Brattleboro.
And that the new store also includes 24 units, I think, of cooperative housing?
Yeah. I think it's part of the community land trust, I believe, down there. So it's kind of an interesting model that's another group that I would actually love to have on the show, is someone from the land trust up here in the Champlain land, which I think is one of the biggest in the country. Another interesting little tidbit out of the world of co-ops, the Plainfield Co-op just yesterday sent a carload, or a truckload, I think, of supplies down to the Occupy Sandy relief efforts that are going on in New York City. They've been sort of spreading the word via Facebook and social media about trying to get as many donations in as possible, and so just kind of co-ops engaging in mutual aid, I thought was kind of a neat thing to have going on.
That's awesome.
And then something from the credit union world, the VSECU, which I believe you are a member of.
I am a member, yes.
Had the We Care Too kind of interesting, kind of democratic community giving. Did you participate in that?
Actually, I did not participate in that. I feel bad about that.
Well, they set aside $10,000 and set up a number of a list of charities, and that were sort of determined by a committee, and then members actually voted on kind of which charities got the money, which was sort of and they voted online, which is sort of an interesting kind of member empowerment strategy for kind of actually directly involving members in community giving. So hopefully, I think it'll be interesting to see if other co-ops take the lead, follow their lead on that. So another little tidbit, the Putney Food Co-op had their annual meeting recently, and they officially paid off their mortgage. So I think we have a photograph of one of their, I think it's a board member, proudly brandishing the last check they wrote before now officially having completely paid off their building and being totally free and clear. So, well, I think we got it kicking around somewhere, but
I'm sure it must be on the Facebook page, right?
There it is. There we go. Yes.
Yep,
we own it. So that's actually a slogan that has been, there's a video out of the recent food co-op and kind of national meeting where a group of people had a little pro-co-op rally and they had a chant. It's like, go co-op, you own it, we own it, the corporations have blown it. So I think that might even be a reference to that little chant. I'll have to dig up that video for a future episode. So it's something that I think everyone in the studio has benefited from in Burlington. City Market patronage refund checks came out.
Yes, yeah. It's always exciting.
Yeah, they posted a photograph of the van full of the checks, which I believe this year were about 3.5%. And for people who are unaware of how co-ops work in this way, if you're part of a co-op and it makes a profit, especially a consumer co-op in this case, the amount of money that you spend, they return to you a percentage of it depending on kind of their profitability. So this year I think it was a little over 3%. So I got a nice $205 I wouldn't have otherwise had, which was pretty sweet. And it's just kind of like one of those moments that really makes co-op membership a little more salient than usual when you got a little bit extra cash in your pocket. And then also, finally, something that I've been participating in, the pro credit union rallies in front of Citizens Bank have been continuing on the 7th month now. And this is from the most recent one, us with our big "Why Not a Credit Union" banner, with the flowers painted by Halila Green, the lettering by Will Peary. So that's continuing to happen every Friday. If any people out there are really enthusiastic about credit unions and want to come down, that's going on as well. So, any other news that I missed or that we should throw out there?
I think that was a pretty good roundup there. Yeah.
Cool. So, do you want to introduce the guest?
Sure. It's our pleasure to have Don Schramm here today, who has started up many a food co-op and was integral in our own Onion River co-op, and will be informing us on some new happenings in co-op in Vermont, as well as some cooperative history in Vermont.
So, Don, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you very much. Maybe we should start right off with some Vermont history. Well, let me start off by stump the chumps? See if you can tell me when this was written and maybe who.
Okay.
But it's going to sound very familiar here. The farmers of the country do not want to undertake to make over the banking laws. But unless those in control of our monetary system rouse themselves concertedly to the realization that they cannot constantly go on loading the expenses of their mistakes and losses from bad investments on the backs of those least able to bear it, then it's not difficult to foresee the day when farmers will, through cooperative efforts and perhaps under a different monetary system, handle more of their own banking affairs, even down to maintaining checking accounts at their own cooperative institutions. Now, when do you think that was written? Was it yesterday?
I'm guessing it was.
Judging by the age of that book,
I'm guessing it was before yesterday. 1930.
Not a bad guess. It was.
I'm gonna guess. All the discussion of the monetary system makes me think populism, and so I'm gonna guess 1890s.
I was going with the Great
This was
Depression.
published. It was probably written in 1937. It was published in 1938. Now, who do you think? Whose are these words? I'll tell you, it's a Vermonter.
Oh, could it be not George Aiken?
It is George Aiken.
All right.
Wow.
And it's his book, Speaking from Vermont, where he talks about his strong commitment to co-ops. Mm-hmm. And at that time in the 30s, there were farmer co-ops, there were insurance co-ops, there was maple syrup co-ops, there were a lot of co-ops. There's the rural electrification program started there. George Aiken had a lot to do with it. He was a very, very strong advocate for cooperatives. And that was one of the first really early movements of co-ops in Vermont. Let me read another piece here that talks about, which is often forgotten about by co-ops today. He talks about 5 major things that are important for co-ops to do. And he says, lastly, cooperative leadership, farm leadership, or the leadership of any movement for that matter, must not lose its touch with the people. Policy and direction must spring from suggestions within the ranks, and offices rotated frequently enough to keep the cooperative spirit alive. That feeling of all the members belonging to the project. Oftentimes, the best organizers and the staunchest supporters of an organization are those persons who've never before had authority invested in them. When official duties are continually laid upon the same few, they are likely to lose the feeling of responsibility which their duties entail. This idea of co-ops staying in touch with their members is so important. And I think some types of co-ops it's easier to do, and others, like food co-ops, I think it's a little bit easier to do than credit unions and utility co-ops. But while we're still talking about history, so the 30s, that's when the Hanover co-op started. That's when the Putney co-op started. Those are they went back to the times of when people were really struggling, and they came together under those circumstances. In the 60s and the 70s, there was a renaissance of co-ops. And in Vermont, part of that renaissance happened from the Free Vermont movement. I'm going to just show some visuals of that time. So this is one of the posters that came out of the Free Vermont movement. And this was really a bunch of communes around the state that were gathering together and trying to think about what they could do. And in the back side of this is sort of their overall mission. Let me just read one little piece of this. When we speak of Free Vermont, we speak of the spirit of people yearning to create a society which responds to each of our needs. It grows from very simple needs. The needs for a loving community, for wholesome food, for decent free medical care, for adequate housing, for meaningful work, for time to understand our children and ourselves, and for the right to choose and change. So out of this movement came a lot of different things. Here's another poster of that time. I don't know how well you can see that. It's Vermont Free Territory, don't tread on me. But that movement, they focused on 3 areas. They started the food buying clubs, which then led to the co-ops all over the state, including Onion River Co-op. They started the People's Free Clinic in Burlington, which is now the Community Health Center, and it's the basis for health centers all across the country. And they also started the Vermont Freeman newspaper, which didn't last very long, but it was sort of the parent of the Vanguard Press, and ultimately 7 Days. So that's a little bit of the past history in Vermont. More recently, this, as you know, this is the International Year of Cooperatives, and the co-op economy in the whole country is just really thriving. Co-ops do tend to do well when people are really stressed, and one of the key things is to keep that going when the country returns to prosperity. Maybe I've sort of been going on. Maybe you have some questions.
Well, I think that was a really good overview of kind of the macro kind of history of co-ops in the state. I was wondering if you could also talk a little bit about maybe giving some of your personal background with co-ops. Like how did you first become aware of them? Like how did you get involved, and what co-ops have you been involved with over the years in Vermont? Because you've been at it for quite a while.
Yeah, I have. When time goes on, that's what happens. You accumulate some tread on you. My first involvement with co-ops was the Hanover Co-op. As a student at Dartmouth, that was where I bought my food, and I was really impressed with it. That really struck a chord with me. And then when I was in graduate school, I went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and I got very involved with one particular movement with the College Students Association. There were only 10 of us in that group, but we did a lot of different things. And that's a whole another story, but that's where I learned about community organizing. It's from those 10 folks in that group. One of the people in that group, with his wife and my wife, the four of us, went door to door in our married student quarters to organize a co-op. And we simply said, give us $5, and when we have enough money, we will buy some food, and we'll put it in a space in the community center and go from there. And that's what we did. And a week after it opened, we had a meeting. People elected a board of directors. We chose not to be on that board of directors, and that was in 1970. And then that went, that was still going into the late 90s. I understand it finally closed in 1999. So that was early experience, and it showed that even though co-ops are really very democratic organizations, you can sort of do it top down to get things started. You know, people don't have to be involved in the nitty-gritty of the startup piece necessarily, but the key thing is to get them involved and have people take ownership as quickly as possible. A similar situation happened when I was living up in Franklin County in the 70s and early 80s, and a organic food store closed. They told me they were, a week before they closed their doors, they told me that was going to happen. So I got the list of members, and I contacted those folks and said, write a check out to me for $50. I won't cash it until we have over $5,000. At that time, we'll have a meeting. You can decide whether you want to create a co-op or not. And a couple months later, we'd raised $6,000. We had a meeting. They elected a board of directors, and they created, at the time, which was called the Rail City Market. Another 10 years later, they sold it. It's now private. It's still the Rail City Market, but it's privately owned. But for 8 to 10 years, it was a co-op. So that's some of my early experience. And I've been involved in different types of co-ops. The business that I've been involved with a good part of my life is data systems. And I first bought that as a corporation, and then a few years later, my partner and I converted that into a worker-owned cooperative, and that's what it is today. It's now in its 34th year. So that gives you a little bit of my background.
So kind of two, I guess I have like two sort of questions that arise out of that. The first is, I kind of want to hear a little bit more about this Rail City Market, because I've heard of occasionally credit unions transitioning from being from being not cooperative to for-profit, but I've never heard of a food co-op actually going through that process. So like, kind of what was that like? Like, how did that happen? What was the dynamics around that?
I had moved from Franklin County down to Burlington, so I wasn't really in touch with them. They got a loan from the Cooperative Fund of New England, which is very similar to the Vermont Community Loan Fund. And I think that the board just got tired of running it, and one of their members said, "Hey, I'll run this. You don't even have to be involved with it." So it didn't really change much for people. It's an interesting thing. It'd be interesting to bring some of the folks that were on the board and the current owner to see what the dynamics were, because I feel as if they just got tired of running it, and that was it. The shoppers remained the same. All the dynamics remained the same, but the control reverted to this one person.
And then with the data systems, kind of like what sort of work was that you were doing in that organization?
Well, data systems lended itself to being a worker co-op because it's a highly technical company. It writes software for businesses, mostly the back office software, which handles order fulfillment, accounting, things like that. And so everybody is at a pretty high level of expertise in working. So it doesn't have the kinds of layers that you often have like in a manufacturing firm where people might be doing just assembly line work and other people doing perhaps more sophisticated work. You don't have that kind of division. So it really lended itself to being a worker co-op. But the struggles there is struggles with any worker co-op, and that is people who are workers don't often want to become owners. They don't understand what that means. It doesn't necessarily mean something that they want to do. I mean, it means another level of responsibility. It does mean more control over their lives, but people are often just quite happy to be slaves. And
how does that democratic process work in data systems, for instance?
It works in the sense that everybody knows all the financial information is out there for everybody to know. They all know what everybody's getting for salaries. They know, so that there's no secrets, and they're very much involved in the new directions that the co-op takes. So that so when we decide to go into a new market, like focus now on data systems now, it's much more in the local food industry. We work with food processors, orchards, farmers, and so on, and we're trying to expand that. But that's a direction that was mutually decided among everybody. It wasn't just a decision coming down from the top. But given that, we still have an organizational structure that is sort of hierarchical in a way. It just makes it easier. I've been the general manager of data systems for going on 30 years now, and that kind of structure is okay. It's just that as worker owners, we agree on what that structure is going to be, and it just makes it simple. Okay, you're taking care of those decisions, you're taking care of these decisions, and it works out really well. But the still overall struggle is as people come in and work there, it's that whole education process of explaining what ownership means and getting them to buy into that.
Because I think that this is, like, what you're bringing up is an issue that is pretty universal to co-ops, is that, the kind of dominant institutional structure of our society is generally like the for-profit company, and there's very kind of defined roles that people are socialized into, whether it's the role of consumer or whether it's the role of employee. And when you try to sort of offer a different role, like, I think oftentimes one of the biggest challenges is simply sort of getting people to the point that they understand what that new role is, and that they don't simply try to superimpose their conditioning for the old role onto the new role. Like the idea of, and there are moments like, you can serve with co-ops where there is some awareness. Like, you can have some really cool moments. Like, I remember there was a time years ago when I was in the bagel shop right over on Shelburne Road, and the girls behind the counter were talking about healthy living in City Market, and they were like, "Oh yeah," and one of them mentioned, and I'm standing in line. One of them mentioned, "Oh, City Market's a co-op." And the other one was like, "What is that?" And then I chime in and say, "Hey, you get your rebate check." Turns out the woman behind me is also a City Market member who backs me up on that, and suddenly there's that moment of membership rather than being a customer.
And City Market sort of incorporates some of that through the volunteer
the member work
right
project,
which not all co-ops have, and it's really a unique and important feature. This makes me want to talk a little bit about City Market, because some of the history there was really interesting. I got involved along with 3 other progressives in running for the board of Onion River Co-op in 1998 with the intention of making the co-op the downtown supermarket. But we also intended to make it a more welcoming place for unionization to happen. Co-ops at that point had a little bit of fuzzy history in terms of labor relations. Often people who work for co-ops were not really well paid, and this was true of a lot of nonprofits as well. And that's something we needed to move beyond. And Onion River Co-op workers were reasonably well paid in the 90s, but they still they weren't getting a living wage. So one of the things we did is we got the board to pass policies that would be more supportive to union organizing and more supportive of the concept of a living wage. We really committed to that. But we also supported the idea of moving the Onion River Co-op downtown and making City Market. And the size increased like 5-fold in that process.
Where was the co-op at that time?
Co-op was on North Winooski Avenue, across from the Molly Gen Center. And before that, it had been on Archibald Street. And we had, in the early 90s, we had moved it from Archibald to North Winooski. I had a peripheral role in that. But I want to talk about some of the challenges. And there are many challenges, but one of the most interesting things was that the co-op, the Onion River, was very committed to organic foods. And it had an elite quality about it. There was an elitism that was really disturbing. And I think that's why a lot of people were really nervous that here's this elite group, part of this co-op are going to move downtown, and they're going to have this big supermarket, and it's going to be all just for them and their friends. And I don't think anybody in the co-op really intended that, but that was sort of the flavor of it, that when people, regular folks sort of came in there, they didn't really feel very comfortable at home. And that was one of the biggest struggles that Onion River had to make in that transition. And you still see some of it going on there. But
when I was at, actually, it's really interesting you bring that up, because when I was in Barrie for and it sat in on the listening session for the newly forming co-op in Barrie, I talked to the organizer, Emily Kaminsky, and she, one thing that had come up, and she actually wrote a little article about it that we posted on the Facebook page. If you kind of go back through, you can find it. But sort of an article about how something that she kept encountering was people sort of, their association, especially in sort of a low-income community like Barrie, their association with co-op as, expensive, organic, like unaffordable, like all these things. And so in their process, they're really kind of trying to sort of have it as a store that will meet the needs and expectations of their community. And so like that discussion has been coming up multiple times, which is an interesting thing to...
Well, it's coming up in a situation like that, but it's also coming up within the co-op movement itself. City Market really represents, to co-ops across the country, this new integrated market. This one that is, it's got its organic and its sort of gourmet foods, but it's got a lot of conventional foods, and it's really trying to meet the needs of the folks that are there, all different kinds of folks. And it still has this image of being expensive, but in fact it isn't. Whenever you do a shopping comparison with Hannaford's and Shaw's, and City Market does really well. Mm-hmm. But it does have some very expensive things there, but that's really a very small part of the total picture. But anyway, it's being used as a model for the newer food co-ops. In the 60s and the 70s, those food co-ops were really, and in the 80s for that matter, were basically organic food, and that's what was driving them. And now the commitment is much more to really meeting the needs of the folks that are there, the members and the shoppers. And City Market they've been very creative in some of the things they've done. They have taken the Three Squares Vermont program, and they got authority from the Congress to do a pilot project there, which they've been doing for a number of years, that if you use a Three Squares Vermont card, which is sort of a food stamp card, you get a 10% discount on all your groceries. Mm-hmm. And this has been a really great program. It's a way to go that extra step to helping folks make it through the tough times, and it's brought in a lot of low-income members into the co-op. So co-op now has over 7,000 members, and I think probably 1,500 of them are people that use that card. So That's one thing they've done. There's many things they've done. But another thing that they introduced was this concept of why not apply fair trade, not just to third world countries, but to producers in Vermont. So they said, well, why don't we go to a dairy, and they did, to Monument Farms, and say, well, what do you need to get from us that would be a fair price for your milk? And we can agree on this each year, and that'll be your price for the year, no matter what happens with the overall price of milk. However it fluctuates, we'll set this one price, and we'll pay you that, and you're guaranteed that you'll get a fair price, and we're guaranteed a stable cost. And so out of that came the co-op milk, which they sell at both City Market, Hunger Mountain, and Middlebury Co-op. So
that's very cool of in making sure that that also works for the producers as well. I think it seems like we might have, you were talking about the group of progressive people and some of the, I think in terms of member work, is that something that you guys kind of took on?
Well, member work was part of it right from the beginning. I mean, most of the work was just volunteer work to start with. When these buying clubs started going in the early 70s, it was all volunteer, you know, and then it was quite a step when they first hired their first paid worker. I'm not sure. Larry Kupperman might have been one of the. If he wasn't the very first one, he was one of the very first ones, and then they slowly grew from there. But they kept. Most of these co-ops had this member work set up, and but there was times when people were really nervous about it because when members were working, they were getting paid at discounts on their food, and people were worried that the IRS could come in and say, hey, what's happening here on the Social Security taxes and things like Medicare taxes and stuff that are not being taken. So co-ops got nervous about it. Some of them eliminated those programs altogether. The City Market and River Co-op has not only kept that, they've expanded it so that now you can do member work, and it's volunteer work for the food shelf and for other nonprofits, and that counts as your member work and towards your discount.
And actually, a quick pitch related to that for anyone out there who's working, who is a City Market member and wants to crank out some kind of fun member work hours. The City Market COTS Christmas tree sales coming up. I think December 5th to the 15th, and you can go on the website and there's an online sign-up sheet if you want to. For 2-hour shifts, you just help tie down trees to the tops of people's cars and meet other members, and I did it last year and it was a lot of fun. So we'll probably post a link to the Cooperative Vermont Facebook page if you're interested. And I'm doing my partner and I are doing a few hours and gonna bank some to get our sweet 12% discount. But yeah, that's one of the many ways that you can kind of participate in the co-op in that member work capacity.
So maybe we could talk a little bit about the different kinds of co-ops. You're working with the credit union. That's a co-op, but we know utility co-ops. We know there's obviously food co-ops. You have co-ops like a lot of the hardware stores are co-ops. Now they're not. It's not the people walking in the stores that the co-op members. It's the stores themselves that are members of a sort of a buying cooperative. Yeah. At that.
Or actually, I believe Great Harvest Bread, the Great Harvest Bread store is actually part of a similar sort of marketing co-op where it's the owners of each store are part of a cooperative organization. So it's there's and then a couple different cooperative farms in the Intervale. You've got the Intervale Community Farm, which is a consumer co-op owned by the people who get their CSAs there. You have Diggers Mirth, which is a kind of worker collective, so all of the workers participate in the decision-making process and divide the profits of that farm evenly.
Well, there's sort of different. I quoted George Aiken about this connection back to the members, and that's one of the areas that seems to vary from co-op to co-op. It's something like it's part of the policy governance of City Market. One of the pieces of that is that the board has a responsibility to stay in touch with the members and keep that connection so that they know what the members want, and there's that sort of feedback loop. It's tricky because that means in a lot of cases getting on the phone, interacting with members, and it takes quite a bit of commitment, quite a bit of effort. And so depending on the board, it can go up and down in terms of what that connection is like. But at least with food co-ops, it's a little easier. I would think like with credit unions, you just don't see that happening. But I think it's still a responsibility, I would think, of the board to do that. So Eric, what would you say to that?
I mean, I think it's critical for a cooperative to be in touch with its members, and really that's the sort of, I mean, the board should really be incorporating the values of its membership into decision making. So the question is, how do you stay in touch with those values? That comes from the membership.
It's like talking to Michael Healy, who I'm hoping to have on the show at some point in the near future. He facilitates board meetings kind of, I think, professionally, and does his member work at City Market to do that. But he used he had a great phrase where it was like listening with many ears. That people will use different mechanisms to provide, like members will use different mechanisms to provide feedback to the organization. Some people will do member work and then mention something while doing that. Other people will maybe fill out an online survey. Others will fill out sort of a comment form. And different people feel comfortable providing feedback in different ways. And so one of the kind of major things that, from that perspective, is that you should have as many ears as possible, as many places for that feedback to happen, so that no matter what someone's comfort level is, they always have a way to sort of have their voice be heard, which I thought was a really useful way of looking at the topic.
It's a good phrase. Looks like many years.
So so you've got this whole background with many different cooperatives, really kind of sort of in Vermont. You've been involved in worker co-ops, consumer co-ops, and now you're involved kind of in a new co-op initiative in Burlington. That is sort of taking the first steps towards possibly turning Burlington Telecom, our local municipally owned telecom company, into a consumer cooperative. I was thinking maybe do you want to talk a little bit about the background of how this project has come into being?
Sure, I could talk a little bit about this. I think the most important thing is right now we're in the midst of a survey, and the survey is probably our most important focus, and so we want to let people know that it's you can do this survey by going to www.greenmountainfiber.com, and we need people to do that soon, because that'll give us a sense of what the strength of the support in doing this whole project. So now I'm telling you that before I'm telling you what it's all about.
And for people who might want to find a link, we'll also post a link to the survey on the Cooperative Vermont Facebook page.
What a lot of people are not aware of is that what we have here in Burlington in terms of the internet fiber, the fiber to the home, is unsurpassed any place in the world. This is an extraordinary resource that we have. It's not only something we have now, but it's something that's in place. It's going to be good 30, 40 years from now. It still will be a valuable resource for the people living in Burlington, and hopefully can get spread to other parts of Vermont. So that's a key thing to keep in mind. We have a resource, whatever the troubles it's had, this is a world-class resource. It's just phenomenal. Everybody is pretty much aware that it had some financial difficulties, that they especially hit in 2008 when the whole country was going into a financial crisis. That really pushed it into a really bad state. And it's mostly, it isn't that Burlington Telecom isn't well run or isn't profitable, but it had an overwhelming debt that it just could not pay back. It's a Cadillac system and an expensive system, and we have it, and it's sort of been burdened by this debt and hasn't been able to get out of that. Now, probably ideally, it would work well if the city could hang on to it, but it may not. In terms of dealing with city capital, it has to figure out some kind of settlement with them. So what a group of us about a year ago met and decided that we would like to give the city another option, and that's the option of having a local co-op available to purchase Burlington Telecom and operate it locally for the sake of people in Burlington and the rest of Vermont. So that's where it started. There's a lot of public information out there because the Burlington Telecom has to report on a regular basis to the Public Service Board. And those are all public documents. So in those documents, you get some idea of the finances, get some idea of how they're doing. And if you look at them carefully, Burlington Telecom is doing pretty well. And I've had their service for 4 years now. And I have challenged them a number of times, and their service has been top-notch. Now, I've heard stories that it wasn't so good in the past, but people are saying now there's just no better service. They really are responsive, they go out of their way. So they've corrected any issues there might be around services, they've corrected it. Financially, they're doing fine, but they have this big debt hanging over their heads. So basically, this group of ours, we figured, okay, now is maybe the time to see if we can pull together a co-op, get it to a point where it could make a serious offer to the city, and then the city would have this as an option.
So can I ask just sort of a question just about the sort of the group that came together? What was the sort of composition, and how did you guys how did you guys find each other, I guess?
Okay, well, a number of years ago, probably 3 years ago, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, I'm not sure. I testified, when this all was stirred up, I testified before the city council and said we should think about a co-op as an option for Burlington Telecom. I just threw that idea out there and left it at that. And then a year later, Al Mattson contacted me, and Al Mattson had been on the board of the Onion River Co-op, and he thought he had the same idea, and then he heard that I had suggested the idea, so he came and touched base with me. This was probably a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I said, well, do some research, find out if there's some co-ops out there that are doing this type of thing, and let's talk some more. So he started doing that, and then in the meantime, I heard from Al Wagner, and I don't know where he got the idea, but he was, Al Mattson is a finance person. He knows a lot about, financing and how you get companies to succeed financially. So he's a numbers person. Al Wagner is a sort of a computer technician. He takes care of people's hardware and their software issues and stuff like that. So he came. I said, well, gee, hey, Al. Al Mattson is working on the same, or interested in the same thing. Maybe the two of you should get together. So they got together and they started going at it. Then they came back to me and we started looking at the numbers and trying to figure out a business plan. And that's where it started. And we just sort of slowly met. We met on a regular basis. Then we brought in a friend of Al Wagner's, Pamela Linton, who is a turnaround specialist, and she lives in Boston. And her job is turning around companies that are not doing well. And then we brought in Greg Epler-Wood, who, and that was more like 6 months ago. And Greg is a media specialist, and he was on the advisory board of Burlington Telecom. And in general, we have really tried to stay independent and not, we're all kind of fresh at this. We don't have any connections. But Greg was the first person we brought in that had any kind of connection with Burlington Telecom. And then more recently, we brought in Peter Jewett and Casey Lyons and Peter's partner, Jason. These are folks that are really technical people that can write websites and can know how to do the links to the different social media and stuff like that. So that's how we got started. But basically, right now, we're at the point where this is a huge project. If we go forward with this, it's going to take a lot of time. We have to get a lot of members. We have to raise a lot of money. So we wanted to get a sense of what is the community support for that. So a couple weeks ago, we started a survey. We put it out, a link out there. We have over 600 people who've responded. We'd like to get 1,000 people. We're going to close it out probably a week from now. It'll be closed out. So we want people to take the survey. It takes like 7 minutes or so. It'll give us some idea of what the community support is for this idea.
And where can people find that survey again?
It's at greenmountainfiber.com. So if you go to that site, be careful. It's not plural. It's just if you go to the plural fibers, you're going to get a company that sells yarn and that type of thing. No, it's greenmountainfiber.com, and then you can take the survey there. We haven't created the co-op yet. We want to find out, is there enough support to do this? And then we will proceed from there. So if we proceed, probably beginning of December, we're going to make that decision and figure it out.
So do you have a sense, you're kind of gauging the level of public support with the survey. Do you have a sense of sort of, are there any models out there of similar sorts of projects but that will inform kind of the way that you go? Or are you guys going to be sort of, is it going to be very sort of seat of the pants type thing? Like,
it's, we've looked pretty intensely, and there are some co-ops out there. A lot of cases they don't own the telecom business itself. They're sort of a consumer co-op that's buying the services. So we're sort of creating this as we go along in a lot of ways, if that's the case. And but there's a lot of good reasons to do it. If there is a support, keeping it local means a lot of things. It means we're keeping the jobs local. The jobs aren't going to go out of state. We're going to keep the profits. The money is going to stay local. The services and the things that the telecom company needs to buy will be bought here, and the profits will stay here. But probably most importantly, the control will stay here. It will be local folks who will be deciding where the service gets expanded, what kinds of services are offered. All that will stay in the community and stay in Vermont, and that's what we would like. But we still look at this as, we understand the city has to make its decisions as to what it's going to do. We want to offer this as an option, and a strong option, one that they can seriously consider.
so what, so in terms of, obviously like the financial piece of this is large because it's been the finances that have been the kind of focus of the whole Burlington Telecom fracas in general. But what sort of options exist that you guys currently see as like sources of the financing to make this sort of thing happen?
Well, it's hard to get bank financing, but you can. It's not like getting a mortgage on a house or getting a loan for a regular, straightforward business, because when you go to a bank, they have to have the technical expertise to evaluate the risk that's involved, and a lot of banks just don't have that expertise for telecom businesses. But there are some that can do that, and the kind of match that they'd be looking for is they probably want at least 50% our responsibility. We'd have to come up. It's not like you could get a 20% on your house mortgage stuff, but we need 50% anyway. So we would need to raise probably, we're just guessing right now, probably we'd have to raise $5 million in terms of member equity and member loans to be able to have something that we can match the commercial loans with.
When you say member equity and member loans, you want to just unpack a little bit what that means for viewers who are maybe not familiar with those terms?
It's like with when we were creating City Market, Onion River Co-op members had equity shares. So that just like today, I think it's $200. You could go in, you could put $200 down, you're a member, you get whatever the benefits of membership is, including patronage refunds if they're available, as they have in the last few years. And then if you move out of town, you go in, you get your $200 back. So it's not a fee, it's not like Costco, it's actual equity membership. So you are an owner. So we would try to raise maybe $1 million in member equity, so that the member shares would be $1 million. Now, when we were doing City Market, we had to go beyond that. We had to raise money for loans, so that we had the money available to do that expansion. So we approached members, and they, quite a few members loaned money. I can't remember how much. It might have been $600,000 in loans that we had from members, and that was paid back over 10 years, and at an interest rate, I don't know, it was 4 or 5%. So we would do the same thing in this case, and the business plan would be to be paid back over 10 years. But this is sort of getting ahead of ourselves. We really don't know. Mm-hmm. If there's enough community support for this and we go forward, we're going to be soliciting that input from the community to figure out what really will work. And there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of very skilled people in this community that can help with this process.
I think that the survey is a great first step, because it seems to me with Burlington Telecom, it's not only the financials that were a problem. It's sort of the issue around transparency, and to build the community support for this project is crucial.
So in terms of people obviously taking the survey as the first step for people getting involved, but once you have the surveys completed, is there going to be sort of a chance for people who do want to put themselves forward and be willing to sort of contribute to the project, either monetarily or in terms of their time or expertise? Is there going to be sort of a meeting, or what would be the sort of?
I would think that would be the natural flow of things.
Mm-hmm.
And, but it's it's new ground. It's we have definitely tapped into, even as far as we've gone so far. There are people that are jumping out of their skin with excitement, and we need that energy, and we need those resources. But how do you tap into that? I'm not exactly sure yet. First we have to sort of go through the survey, see what kind of support we've got, and then from that pull together a bunch of people and see what happens. But it may not. It may be that we look at this and say, just is not enough support. So that's why it's really key that people take the survey. It's not a popularity contest. We only want people to take it once. We prefer just one person in a household, because we really want to know what is the real support we have out there, and what does this look like, and it's not a popularity contest here. And I also want to emphasize that Burlington Telecom, with or without our involvement, is doing well. It's a great resource for people, and if people are not using that service, you should think about seriously hooking up with them.
So do you have? We've got about 4 minutes left in the show. So, again, if you want to take that survey, it will be on our Cooperative Vermont Facebook page. There will be a link there. And do you have any sort of final kind of thoughts about, final reflections about the cooperative movement in Vermont, or sort of where you'd like to see things heading in the big picture?
Well, I'll add another. There's things that are co-ops and there's things that are close to co-ops. I live in co-housing on East Avenue, and that's been a wonderful experience. It's not a co-op. We would have liked it to have been a co-op, but if you do co-op housing in the U.S., you're looking at 2 or 3 percentage points higher interest on your loans. So in the case of a cooperative housing, you have one loan for the entire project, and then they consider that a commercial loan, and you pay a much higher rate. Whereas a condo association, each family has their own mortgage and it's a lower rate. So it's structured as a condo association, but it really is a co-op in a lot of ways. There are 32 families that live there. We all know each other well. We have common meals every other day. Together we take turns cooking for each other. There's just so much happening, and there's co-ops. There's the Granite City co-op that's happening in Barrie. There's co-ops. The co-op movement is really thriving now. Farmers are figuring out, they're sort of bringing back the co-op movement that was so strong in George Aiken's early days, that's starting to happen again. It's a very exciting time. And one of the things about co-ops is that I'm always puzzled by why people object to a co-op. Because in some ways, you can make the argument that a co-op is the finest form of capitalism. Because capitalism is ownership, where you have owners that own the means of production. But what better way to do this? And companies today, they'll give their eye tooth to get loyalty from their customers. Well, what better thing to do than to have your customers be your owners? That gives you the solidity. And look at how long these co-ops have been around. I mean, the Onion River is going, it's 40 years now. Mm-hmm. Hanover Co-op goes back to the 30s. And that's because your customers and your owners are one and the same. Then we talk about the electric cooperatives.
Right.
I mean, it is in some ways a very pure, perfect form of capitalism. So if you like capitalism, you should really like co-ops. So
well,
I'll
so
leave you with that.
We're going to be exploring a lot of the full diversity of the Vermont cooperative movement as in the coming weeks and months as we continue with this show. But if you want to sort of meet up and talk co-ops, on December 7th in Montpelier, there's the Vermont New Economy Conference, and both Eric and I are going. I think Don said he might consider it as well, so we'll be having a little cooperative breakout there. But until our next live show will be 2 weeks from this evening. So until then, I'm Matthew Kropp.
And I'm Eric Davis.
You've been watching Cooperative Vermont. Good night.